Frank and I broke up just now. There wasn't any special reason. I saw him kissing Wendy when I went back to his office to get my phone. And that mouth, it had just kissed me, like 10 minutes ago. I stood at the door watching them kiss. Maybe they were both really into it and didn't notice me. My phone ring interrupted them. Frank looked up and saw me, his peach blossom eyes still filled with depth, while Wendy looked at me with a challenging look. Wendy is my cousin, a medical genius who just came back from studying in the US. And Frank, he's my boyfriend of 4 years. After catching them, Wendy just smiled. I looked at her face, so similar to mine, nodded unemotionally, then calmly took my phone from Frank's hand, turned around and left, even politely closed the door behind me. After all, I still had a surgery to do, no time to entangle with them. The surgery ended at 10 o'clock in the evening. Frank pushed the door open and without looking up I said, "Remember to knock next time." He handed me a cup of coffee. I glanced at him and without hesitation, took it from his hand. I put down my phone, looked at him sitting across from me, waiting for him to speak first. Wendy had gone back. Frank still had that mild look. She just got back. It's inconvenient for her to stay at a hotel, so she's temporarily staying at my place. I smiled. Sure, I'll go to your place later to get my stuff. I picked up my phone and paused for a moment when I saw the DK building lawsuit case. I'll drive you there, Frank said as he put his coffee down and stood up. I was going to refuse, but then I remembered my car was in for maintenance, so I just accepted the ride. As I walked out, I glanced at the untouched coffee cup and threw it in the trash. But when I got into the passenger seat, I noticed Frank hesitated for a moment before coming to his senses. I didn't say anything, just calmly put on my seatbelt, picked up my phone and continued reading the lawsuit case. Vincent is really making a name for himself in the legal world. This is the third big case this year, right? Who would have thought that the boy who used to be silent and introverted would become such a famous lawyer? I thought enviously to myself, as I absent-mindedly rubbed my aching shoulder. Frank, with one hand on the steering wheel, reached into the compartment and handed me a candy. I didn't take it. In the 4 years we've been together, Frank has never had candy in his car. He didn't even know that sometimes I faint from low blood sugar due to fatigue. He rarely does anything for me. The night lights reflected on his face, and I turned to look at him, suddenly remembering the day he confessed his feelings to me, his young but serious face. He said he liked me and would take care of me forever, which made my heart beat faster. But now, as I looked at the same face, I felt cold inside. Frank didn't look at me. He held the candy for a moment, then seeing that I wasn't going to take it, he put it away. The light reflected in his dark eyes. I felt like I couldn't see Frank clearly now, or maybe I never did. He and Wendy had dated during the same period in college, but they broke up when Wendy went abroad. I knew about this because Frank didn't try to conceal it. Wendy was even his phone's wallpaper. After we got together, he changed the wallpaper, but I unintentionally saw in his album that he still kept it. I didn't say anything, feeling like I, being several years older than him, had to be more magnanimous. The car stopped in front of the apartment building. I didn't get out, and neither did he. After thinking for a long time, I couldn't help but speak. Frank, let's break up. He interrupted me. Stella, let's break up. I looked at him and laughed coldly, sinking the car into silence. And at that moment, I inappropriate thought of the potted plant on my desk, the first gift Frank gave me. For 4 years, I always felt that it never grew, always so small. I was afraid of not being able to keep it alive when I watered it every day. It seemed to be mocking me. I felt suffocated. I wanted to get out of the car now. So, without hesitation, I agreed, opened the car door, and went upstairs. I took out the key from my bag, only to see Wendy in the living room. In just one glance, I saw mockery in Wendy's eyes. I stood still for a moment until I heard Frank coming in behind me. I walked into the study, then to the bedroom. When I stepped back into the living room, I realized I didn't have much stuff. 2 jackets, the tablet, and a thermos. That's all I've had at Frank's place for 4 years. Frank and Wendy were sitting on the sofa in the living room watching me, and at that moment, I wanted to laugh, because I suddenly felt like an outsider about to be kicked out, and they were the family. As I turned around, Wendy called out to me, Stella, it's late. Why don't you stay here tonight? After the half-hearted breakup with Frank, Wendy took on the air of a hostess. Without looking back, I placed the key on the entrance cabinet, picked up the box, and left. Then I made plans to meet Christina for a drink. In a daze, I seemed to catch a hint of a familiar minty scent. It was Vincent's scent in my memory. It was as if I could see the deep and cold figure from my memories. In the haze, when the man looked at me, his eyes were so deep it made my heart race. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but I rarely ran into Frank at the hospital, and during that time I did bump into Wendy, who always greeted me with a smile, calling me cousin. But Christina had quite a few complaints about her. She would whisper criticisms of Wendy in my ear 100 times a day. From morning till night, all she does is cry. I really don't understand how this talented student ended up like this. Christina complained to me while biting on a straw. Do you remember that patient who had a car accident before? The one who was transferred from your neurosurgery department to our thoracic surgery department. And during the chest surgery, she accidentally pressed on an adjacent blood vessel, causing a new bleeding point to appear. Oh my, she delayed a surgery that Stella could have finished in 5.5 stellas by 1.5 stellas. As Christina spoke, she became more and more upset. That day, the surgeries were scheduled very closely, and I almost didn't make it to the next one. Fortunately, I handed over the last bleeding point to a colleague, or else I wouldn't have made it to the next surgery. What's most annoying is, after I finished, I scolded her a few times, and she actually cried in front of me. Frank happened to pass by at that time. I listened quietly, and then what happened? And then, of course, the two of us ended up scolding each other. Christina tossed away the empty Coke bottle and said, "When Frank was with you, he was my friend, but after you broke up, he was just my junior." She suddenly stood up straight and said seriously, "Wendy, let me tell you, in the future, you can only treat him as a junior. Don't hesitate to scold him." I couldn't help but smile and said, "Of course. I understand not mixing personal feelings with work. That's fine." Back in the office, it was raining outside. I stood and listened to the rain for a while, then threw the potted plant into the trash can. I scanned the surroundings and threw away everything related to Frank in the room, including the lucky charm he got for me. My phone vibrated. It was Frank. I didn't know what else there was to say, and was about to refuse him. Frank continued, "We can talk in the hospital's central courtyard." "Go ahead. I have a ward round in 10 minutes. I looked at my watch and thought about the patients I needed to check on today. The smile at the corner of Frank's mouth stiffened. "Stella, it's work hours now. According to the rules, you should call me Professor Stella." I interrupted him. Although I don't care much about hierarchy, today is different, so it's better to keep things clear. I saw Frank clench his fists, lower his head in silence for a while. "I've been thinking a lot these days. Today, I just want to tell you that I loved you before, sincerely. I know it was my fault with what happened between us, but I hope it stays between us. Don't involve Wendy." It dawned on me that he said so much, just to make sure I won't cause trouble for Wendy. The word love. Today I heard it from Frank's mouth for only the second time in these 4 years. The first time was when he was drunk, and I was taking him home. He held my hand and with misty eyes, told me he loved me. Was I happy? Of course. I remember helping wipe his forehead. Before I left, I kissed his forehead with a smile. "Wendy is not in neurosurgery," I said. "If you seek blessings, you should find Christina. After all, Wendy is in her department, and Christina will not trouble her. Ask her to put away that attitude." I watched Frank's furrowed brow and added, "With this time, it would be better to improve yourself more. Christina is kind-hearted and beautiful, so if you only cause trouble for her, she won't say anything. But if it involves her patients, she won't hold back. Please convey my exact words to Wendy. Say that it's from me." I looked at Frank, who seemed like he wanted to say something, glanced at the time. 10 minutes had passed, so I left. "Frank, goodbye." As I walked a few steps, I suddenly remembered the kiss I saw him give Wendy at the office door that day, so I turned back to look at him. "One more thing." I put my hands in my pockets and said, "Don't use the word love on me in the future. I can't stand these unproductive words." Then I turned and left without looking back. If I were to look back, it would mean I deserve it. My clean and sincere love has bloomed, and when it was wrong, it was uprooted. As for how it will be planted in the future, I don't want to think about it. As I passed by the emergency department, I never expected to see Vincent. Vincent, Christina, and I were high school classmates. After graduating, Christina and I went to medical school, while Vincent decisively chose to study law. Since then, we never met again. When the man's deep eyes looked over, I couldn't help but shudder. A few years ago, Vincent's mother was hospitalized due to a brain hemorrhage, and I was the surgeon. Before entering the operating room, Vincent held my hand and begged me to make sure to save his mother. He was teary-eyed and shaking uncontrollably, but all I could say was to do my best. The result was a failed surgery. I witnessed her ECG flatline, and announced her death myself. I don't know what expression I had when I informed Vincent. I only remember his sobbing when he hugged me and cried beside his mother's cold body. I only recall Vincent's mother's pale lips, her body gradually turning cold. I can only remember her waiting for us at the school gate after class, The sparkle in her eyes when she saw Vincent, and the comfort in her voice when she patted my hand, saying how lucky Vincent was to have a friend like me. I couldn't speak then. In fact, Vincent was closer to Christina back then, while I wasn't that familiar with him. Still, I couldn't say anything else, and just smiled, saying Vincent was popular at school and a good person. After his mother's funeral, we never met again, and later, I occasionally heard from Christina that he had gone abroad. Then 2 years later, he returned. But we never met again. After finishing the clinic, I walked to the emergency department and glanced at Vincent, who was quietly receiving the 4 drip. I went over and placed a bottle of milk next to him. He suddenly looked up, his fox-like eyes staring at me intensely. I felt a flutter in my heart, didn't say a word, turned around and left. Later, I went back to bring him a bowl of porridge, because Christina told me that that day when I got drunk, it was Vincent who took me home. Upon hearing that, I just wanted to punch her twice, because I knew that when I get drunk, something unspeakable might happen. But she dared to leave me with a man, an ambiguous man I had a past with. Though I thought Vincent seemed like a gentleman, I was still angry. I bit my lip, thinking it was just about delivering porridge. But when I actually sat across from this man, I instantly regretted it. Vincent's appearance is the complete opposite of Frank's. He doesn't look fierce, but rather sharp and imposing, perfect for a lawyer. Now, he's lounging on the bed, his fox-like eyes slightly raised, hands folded on his stomach, and a hint of a smile on his otherwise expressionless face as he greets me. But just a hint. "Where's Christina?" he asks as he takes the porridge from me. "She's in a meeting and asked me to bring this over," I reply, relieved. "Is this porridge to your liking?" I ask nervously, thinking that someone in Vincent's position might be used to more luxurious food. He chuckles and assures me, "It tastes really good, thank you." My shoulders relax as a sense of relief washes over me. Vincent then starts eating his porridge quietly, and just as I'm considering leaving, he suddenly grabs my wrist with the hand that's still hooked to an 4 drip. Leaning in, he asks, his expression unreadable, "I heard you broke up." My wrist tingles from his touch. Though startled, I maintain a casual smile and confirm, "Yes, that's right." He finally looks up at me, his dark eyes reflecting emotions I can't quite decipher. Feeling uneasy under his gaze, I start to say, "You should rest," but before I can finish, he pulls me closer, making me flinch. I bend down to hear him better, wondering, what's wrong? He dismisses it with a smile, "Nothing. Just wanted to ask if you're free tomorrow. I want you and Christina to join me for dinner, a little reunion of sorts." As I listen to Vincent's deep voice, his breath tickling my ear, I glance at him up close. His fox-like eyes seem less intimidating from this distance, with a hint of allure in their raised arches, but they still hold their usual depth of darkness. Feeling a bit jittery under his intense gaze, I manage to reply, "I'll check my schedule and let you know if I can make it." He nods, releasing my hand. "You should rest now. I'll leave," I say, straightening up quickly. Just as I'm about to walk away, I notice Frank. He doesn't look too happy, his eyes narrowed in slight anger, but I'm too preoccupied to pay him much attention. Back at the office, I confirm with Christina that I'm available after 9 p.m. I inform Vincent, who promptly responds with a simple okay. The surgery that evening isn't too challenging, and we finish by 4:30. However, I can't help but comment to Frank, my assisting doctor, during the procedure, "Frank, can you please suction properly? I can't see the dissection clearly." My neck aches from the lengthy surgery. Seemingly sensing my frustration, Frank doesn't say much, just a low, "Sure." After leaving the operating room, I check my phone and realize I have some time before 9 p.m. I plan to change and meet Christina, but just as I button up my coat, Frank walks in. Frowning, I remove my hands from the buttons and turn to him, saying, "Didn't I tell you to knock before coming in? Do you need a lesson on that too?" Frank places a cup of coffee on the table, explaining, "Sorry, it's a habit. Do you have a moment? If it's about the surgery, you don't need to bring it up here. Handle it yourself." I pour myself a cup of hot water from the dispenser, not even glancing at the coffee he brought. Frank, unfazed, maintains his smile and asks, hesitating slightly, "What's your relationship with Vincent?" Realizing Frank seems to have noticed something, I narrow my eyes and retort, "What does that have to do with you?" Trying to make it clear to him that Vincent and I are no longer together, but he persistently inquires, "Your new love interest?" I almost chuckle at his question, incredulous at his audacity, but for some reason, I feel a sense of relief and casually retort, "What? Only you can have one. But I can't look for someone new." I can't remember if the moment I truly decided to give up was when I saw them kissing outside the office, or when I found the used tissue in the garbage can in his bedroom while collecting my things. I don't believe Frank's words of love. Just as Frank seems about to approach me, I instinctively tense up, only to be surprised by Vincent's sudden presence at the door. Startled, I stare at him as he casually walks in, holding a cup of hot chocolate. Seeing my confusion, Frank also turns to look at Vincent. "Why are you here?" I ask, bewildered. The man by the door, hands in his pockets, a cup of hot chocolate in hand, smiles at me with his fox-like eyes, a hint of mockery present when he glances at Frank. "Christina had a last-minute surgery, so I'm here to take you out for dinner," Vincent explains leisurely, handing me the hot chocolate. "Thank you." I shift my gaze from Frank's disgruntled face to Vincent's eyes and suggest, "Any unfinished business? If not, shall we leave?" When Frank suddenly stopped me as we brushed past each other, I turned around to see his smiling face, as if his earlier frown was just an illusion. He had an academic question to ask me, but before I could respond, Vincent interrupted, saying he was taking me away, because I had plans to have dinner with someone else. I felt stiff as we walked to the hospital's entrance. Vincent finally let go when we arrived and asked if I was alright. I almost bumped into him, feeling embarrassed. Vincent teased me about my new love interest, and leaned in close with a serious look, making me feel flustered. I tried to avoid his question, and suggested we make plans for another time. Vincent agreed and led me to our table. At the restaurant, Vincent reminded me of my stomach ulcer, and suggested I eat something light. He laughed, acknowledging my concern for his health. I brought up the night he had taken care of me when I was drunk, thanking him, and subtly asking if I had done anything strange. Vincent brushed it off as no big deal, saying he was just passing by. I relaxed, realizing he wasn't upset about that incident. Vincent then brought up his recent victory, in a case involving the DK building. I praised his success, and he seemed curious about my knowledge of his cases. I tried to deflect the topic, mentioning I heard about it from someone else. Despite my attempts to remain aloof, Vincent invited me to dinner next time, insisting that he would treat me. I was surprised by his assertiveness, and agreed reluctantly. As we finished dinner, Vincent drove me home. I noticed him glancing at me a few times, but when we reached my building, I decided to clarify our relationship. I calmly told him that we should just be friends, trying to be direct and mature about it. Vincent chuckled sarcastically, and unlocked the door without saying much. I hurried out of the car, feeling relieved, but also a bit awkward. Back at home, I received a call from Christina, and I recounted the events of the day to her. She hinted at my previous feelings for Vincent, making me question my decision. But I firmly explained that I had just ended a relationship, and didn't want any surprises. Christina's words stirred up memories of the past, making me reflect on my current situation. Before, Vincent was very ordinary. His face hadn't yet shed its childishness. His fox-like eyes were already taking shape. He looked like a delicate young boy from a distance, with a hint of nonchalance. When did I start liking Vincent? Maybe when I saw him get rice stuck in the corner of his mouth while eating, or when he unconsciously shielded me and Christina on the inner side of the road on our way home. These feelings seeped into my daily life like a gentle spring rain, quietly and unnoticed. A girl's feelings are always hidden in her eyes. For a while, my eyes were glued to Vincent, shining brightly. I told Christina about my vague teenage crush. She didn't tell Vincent. Instead, she often created opportunities for just the two of us to be together, which made me both joyful and anxious. Perhaps I was too obvious, and Vincent noticed, so he started distancing himself from me. It wasn't really distancing, he just became quieter. Gradually, our trio became two, and he always had many reasons to leave early. Being smart, how could I not know? I probably brought him pressure or trouble. I don't think I'm someone who would cling to someone relentlessly. Maybe I didn't like him that much after all. Or maybe it would be better for me to suppress this liking a little. I took a day off from the hospital, bought a bouquet of flowers from the florist, and took a taxi to the cemetery. It's been 4 years now, and every year I come alone to visit Vincent's mother early, avoiding Vincent that way. I didn't bring white chrysanthemums, because I saw Aunt Lou smiling at the white roses in the flower shop. As warm and pale as the roses, I as usual placed the flowers behind the gravestone. Christina and others told me it wasn't my fault. Actually, I knew it. I'm just an ordinary doctor. Saving lives goes against the natural order. I did my best. Everyone tried to console me. It's not that I can't accept death. I just remember the moment when Vincent's tears fell on the back of my hand. I think I may never forget. The tear was so hot, it made me feel the weight of his head resting on my shoulder was so heavy. Neurosurgery is already high risk. I have experienced the failure of surgeries before. For ordinary patients, I would feel sorry, guilty, and sad. But when I said sorry to Vincent, when I saw him slowly turning red-eyed to uncontrollably hug me and cry, I can't explain my feelings. All I could hear was crying, Ringing in my head were Vincent's crying and the smile Aunt had given me before entering the operating room. I saw Vincent again at the funeral. I bowed my head in respect, whispered another apology to him, and didn't dare to look up at him. Later on, I heard he went abroad. When Christina mentioned it, I was eating cherries, accidentally swallowing a seed, but I immediately picked another cherry, nodding. I stood quietly for a while, brushing off the dust from the gravestone, bowed slightly, and walked away. As I descended the steps, I saw Vincent's car across the street, and him leaning against the car. I took a deep breath, met his fox-like eyes, which remained as dark and inscrutable as ever. Here to see my mom. He walked up the steps, standing next to me. I nodded gently. Let's go together. His tone was calm, giving nothing away. I was about to say I had already been there, but he glanced at me sideways and I found myself unable to speak. I swallowed nervously and went up with him. Vincent took a few steps forward, bent down, took out the roses I brought, and placed them neatly under his mother's photo. I was surprised and a bit guilty. Vincent was so perceptive. He must have known all these years that I had been leaving flowers at the back of the gravestone. He turned around. Let's go. I hesitated, then nodded. As I followed Vincent down the steps, I found it strange. He seemed to be here just to look, without even bringing flowers. But at least he didn't ask me why I was there. Going back to the hospital, he gestured towards the car. I didn't refuse. Some things need not be said more than once. Being too deliberate is not an adult style. I was afraid that if I said I took a leave of absence, Vincent would make a fuss. So I lied and said I was going to the hospital. If dropping me off at the front station is not out of your way, it's fine. I thought the office shouldn't be that quiet, and he was their top, no, signature. With such thoughts, I couldn't help but laugh, then quickly corrected my expression. He just glanced at me, on the way. I happen to have a hospital checkup, it's on the way. I sneaked a look at his fox-like eyes, suddenly feeling less oppressed. As we parted ways at the hospital entrance, he unusually smiled, softly saying, goodbye. On my way back to the office, I thought about Vincent's smile before parting. I couldn't help but feel moved. Occasionally, his smile was very charming. This smile also lifted my spirits. Unfortunately, the good mood didn't last long. As soon as I arrived at the office, Wendy showed up right behind me. Stella, Frank asked me to bring this to you. She smiled sweetly, her movements proper and humble. Besides the formalities, there was no further exchange. I took the document, not wanting to engage with her. The item has been delivered, you can leave now. I had just finished saying this when I saw Frank standing at the door. I furrowed my brow. What did this mean? Wendy also seemed surprised. My gaze shifted between the two of them. I'm sorry, Professor. Frank leisurely entered, with a perfectly apologetic expression. I haven't sorted out the documents yet, it's my oversight. I felt puzzled by Wendy's icy glare, although the look wasn't directed at me, but at Frank. Suddenly I understood. It seemed like those two had an argument and came to me for diversion, trying to feel superior by involving me. The thought made me lose my temper. Why bother me with these petty issues when we've already broken up? I was about to lash out when I caught sight of the dark figure at the door. Huh. Wendy and Frank also saw Vincent at the door. Their expressions varied. On the other hand, the instigator himself looked nonchalant, still holding a cup of hot chocolate. His fox-like eyes held a hint of amusement, as if watching a good show. What's up? I had to ask. I'm here for the dinner you promised me last time. He walked into the room, placing the hot chocolate on the same pile of papers from earlier, whether intentionally or not. Then he turned to look at the other two, pausing a bit longer on Frank. It's you. Vincent smiled casually, his dark gaze fixed on Frank. Are you here to ask Stella about academic issues? To my surprise, the faces of the two in front of me visibly darkened, and Wendy's gaze towards Frank turned even colder. Watching the scene before me, as shameful as it was, I suddenly found the situation oddly intriguing. Yes, but it's work hours now. You shouldn't be trying to take Stella out for a meal, right? Frank's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly, his smile gentle yet carrying a hint of aggression. Why would I? Vincent chuckled lightly. I certainly won't disturb Stella from work. He glanced meaningfully at Frank. Then, his smile vanished as he picked up the hot chocolate and placed it in my hand, though his gaze remained on Frank. Aren't you leaving? You're out early today. After dinner, you can go back and take a nap. Vincent glanced at me, seemingly dissatisfied with my spectator-like attitude. I stood up, smiling. Let's go. Frank tried to grab my arm as I walked past, but I dodged. I've taken time off. It's my off-duty hours now. By the time Vincent and I were back in the car, I had distanced myself from the earlier events. What do you want to eat? It was already 9:30. And I just wanted to get this over with. Although grateful for him helping me regain control of the situation, I didn't want him intruding so boldly and casually into my life. It's your treat, so you decide. I turned to him, indifferent. I don't get it. I know a good restaurant. I texted him the address. You can rest. I'll call you once we're there. He turned up the air conditioning and pulled out a stack of blankets. I glanced at the blankets, didn't refuse, sighed silently, and closed my eyes. On the way back, I declined Vincent's offer to drive me home. I can manage on my own. I stood my ground. Wouldn't it be more convenient if I drove you? What if you encounter someone bad on the way back? He was firm. I'll be fine, and you should head to work. I remained unmoved. It's on the way to the law firm and you're home. He smiled persuasively. In the end, I was persuaded. He did as he said, just dropping me home. But I didn't expect that the moment I stepped in, Vincent called Stella downstairs. Come down, I have something to say. His voice sounded heavy through the phone. I ran to the window, puzzled to see the familiar car, and figure downstairs. I know you went to see my mom. He looked up towards my window. Vincent, I interrupted him. Come up, you know which floor, don't you? I knew that once I faced him, I couldn't avoid this topic. It would hang between us. After he entered and surveyed the room, I did the same, relieved to see it wasn't too messy. Then I poured him a glass of hot water. He took it lazily, sitting on the sofa with his long legs slightly bent, his dark eyes calm. Sitting across from him, he ultimately broke the silence. I know you visited her every year for the past 4 years. I wasn't surprised. I had guessed it in the morning, a bit anxious at first, but now I was calm. Stella, her death wasn't your fault. This was the first time he solemnly called my name since we met. I thought she had recovered. Her smile before the operation. Vincent understood my doubts in my eyes, explaining, it reoccurred just a week before going to the hospital. I suddenly remembered her smile right before going into the operation room. It was hard to believe that a patient experiencing a relapse of depression would have such a smile. I thought she was trying to comfort me. I clutched my dress, my voice trembling. She didn't want to live. She wanted to leave me. Vincent stood up and hugged me. It's not your fault. Tears finally fell. Do you know her final words to me? He wiped my tears away with a tissue. She said, don't make it hard for you. I widened my slightly red eyes in disbelief as I gazed at him. Then I threw myself into his arms, sobbing quietly. My heart ached for Vincent and also for Auntie. I didn't know how he felt when Auntie decided to leave him, or how Auntie struggled to express herself when she saw her son for the last time, and could only manage to say, don't make things difficult for that girl. Auntie must have wanted to apologize to her son, wondering if she had ever felt torn between the pain and reluctance. She knew she owed Vincent a lot in this lifetime, but she was so focused on herself that when she couldn't go on living, she thought of death. Yet in the end, all she could say was that one sentence, don't make things difficult for her. She took care of everything behind her, except for Vincent. Vincent must have begged his mother countless times not to leave him, to show some mercy. But he knew he couldn't bring himself to say it, because he had seen too many nights where his mother suffered insomnia and breakdowns, seen her cry in loneliness and helplessness in the darkness, seen her swollen eyes lie that everything was fine. He knew he couldn't utter the words to make his mother live for him. He didn't want his mother to suffer anymore. He couldn't help her, so he had to let her go. I didn't understand any of this. For so many years, I never knew. Later, as I cried myself to sleep, I woke up to find it was already 5 p.m. I stared at the sunset outside the window, unable to snap out of it for a long time, until a knock on the door sounded, and I watched as Vincent's foxy eyes peered out from behind the door, followed by a hint of a smile. Why aren't you up yet? Freshen up and come out for some porridge. I was stunned. Why hadn't he left yet? As I stepped out of the room, I saw 2 bowls of porridge and some side dishes on the table. The person who made them was sitting in front of me, untying his apron and beckoning me to come over. I hesitated for a moment, furrowing my brows as I approached. Did you make these? Why are you so familiar with my house? Sit down and eat. He gestured with his eyes. You mentioned last time that you prefer something light, so I only know how to cook porridge. I took a sip and it was delicious, my favorite porridge. If it didn't have ginger in it. Is adding ginger your habit? Aren't you an early riser? I made it this way to prevent you from catching a cold in the morning dew, Vincent said matter-of-factly, not treating me like a doctor at all. Didn't like it. He propped his head up with one hand and stirred the porridge with the other. No, I really like it, I replied. After saying it, memories of the last time I brought him porridge flooded back. The conversation we had then was exactly the same as now. Suddenly, I felt like laughing. In fact, I did laugh. The man across from me, eating porridge, looked at me with a puzzled expression until Vincent left, and we both tacitly avoided bringing up that matter again. Goodbye. He stood at the door, waving to me. For some reason, every time he said goodbye, It felt like we would meet again soon. I smiled at him and softly said, goodbye. The next day at work, Christina leaned in and asked me mysteriously, Stella, is Vincent's porridge good? I chuckled, knowing she must have been informed by that mischievous little guy. Why are you so interested in Vincent and me? I asked. Christina sighed. There have been too many misunderstandings between you two. Do you remember when you told me you liked Vincent, and then he started avoiding us even more? She continued. Actually, his reasons back then weren't all lies. There really was something going on in his family. During those days, Vincent's father showed up at their house. I remember one day he didn't come to class. It was because he had sent his drunk father to the hospital. That's why he had to go to the law university. He said he would never forgive that man in his life. He became a lawyer to protect those who were hurt. He said as long as that man showed up once, he could send him back in again. I listened in silence, having already suspected why Vincent had ignored me in the past. But the reasons didn't matter anymore. It was all in the past. What's missed can't be regained. I didn't see Vincent for several days after that, unsure if resolving Auntie's affairs had fulfilled a desire in my heart. But I could sense that the barrier between Vincent and me had started to weaken. As I exited the operating room, I ran into Frank. I stared at the gentle man, with dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, but not showing it on his face. Upon seeing me, Frank's beautiful peach blossom eyes lit up slightly. I used to love Frank's eyes the most. They held the vastness of mountains and lakes, the vigor of youth, and the gentleness of moonlight. But now, what was left in those eyes? I walked past Frank to find Christina. That was not my moon. I didn't look back at those dimming peach blossom eyes. I never expected that I would meet Vincent again, and it was in the emergency department once more. I furrowed my brows, stomach flew again. When I entered, Vincent slightly propped himself up, but I held his shoulder and said, it's better to lie down. Perhaps still feeling unwell, today's Vincent was oddly obedient. He nodded and lay down, his foxy eyes fixed on me. Without the usual pressure, the faint redness at the corner of his eyes made him appear pitiful. Haven't been eating properly. He didn't speak, shaking his head then nodding slightly. I couldn't quite understand what he meant, so I poured him a cup of hot water first. Lowering his head to take a sip, he stayed silent. Seeing the atmosphere become more awkward, I said, well, you should rest first. Before I could finish, he suddenly grabbed my hand. Lips pursed, he finally spoke. When I looked at him, I want porridge. I was taken aback. Okay, wait for me. Then he released my hand. As I left the room, I realized belatedly that the current Vincent seemed like a child that needed coaxing. Though I thought so, my heart strangely felt a bit happy. It was rare to see this side of Vincent. When I came back with the porridge, Vincent was texting. He calmly put down his phone when he saw me coming in, set up the small table, crossed his legs, and sat on the bed obediently like a waiting animal. I asked him while serving the porridge, why didn't he eat well? Was it because of a tricky case? Without saying a word, he stirred the porridge. I suddenly realized I might have crossed a line with my question, but it was okay not to say anything. It's about the DK building. Wasn't that case solved long ago? KY is still causing trouble. He let out a sigh. I knew KY, the rival of the DK building, both involved in this lawsuit. Even though I couldn't fully understand, seeing Vincent's expression, I knew it was trouble. Suddenly, my phone rang. I picked up and furrowed my brows. Frank, go for a checkup first. I'll be there soon. I hurriedly said goodbye to Vincent, who nodded obediently. I didn't notice how tightly he was holding the blanket, his hand as white as paper. When I arrived at the scene, Wendy was peering inside at Frank. I glanced at her and went to look at Frank's checkup results on the computer. Fortunately, it wasn't too serious. There was a blood clot in his brain, slightly large, pressing on the optic nerve, causing him to faint suddenly. How did this blood clot come about? He woke up not long after. Have you fainted before? For how long? Frank's face looked thinner, his eyes lacking their usual spark. About a week ago, I fainted once, but I thought it was due to lack of rest, so I didn't get it checked. Is it serious? I smiled. Not serious, just a blood clot. He seemed to relax a bit, still looking worried. I reassured him, it's not severe, trust my skills. Yes, I do, he hurriedly replied. Rest well, I'll inform you of the surgery time this afternoon. If you have any questions, just let us know, I told him before leaving the ward and seeing Wendy waiting outside. You can go in to see him, he's fine, no need to worry. Wendy glanced at me and nodded. I turned back to my office to prepare for Frank's surgery. In the evening, Vincent came to bid farewell at my office. I joked, you better eat well in the future. It's not good to be at the hospital all the time. He casually replied. Vincent was back to his usual self, and I felt a tad disappointed. Then, he casually asked, you answered the phone earlier. heard you mention Frank. Is he your ex-boyfriend? What happened to him? Not surprised that he knew Frank's name, his question still felt odd. I replied, he has a blood clot in his brain, might need surgery. Serious? He looked anxious, sensing something amiss. I added, not serious, won't affect his life after the surgery. Seeing Vincent relax, I couldn't help but wonder, you seem to care about him a lot. Vincent's expression darkened instantly. Stop making wild guesses, he retorted. I suppressed a smile, it's getting late. I have to check on Frank later, so I won't see you off. Hearing that, Vincent sat down on the couch and said, I feel like I might have an accident if I go back alone, and I haven't had dinner yet. I'll wait for you, and we can eat together later. Glancing at him, engrossed in texting, and remembering he was, after all, a patient, I could only say, then wait for me here for a while, before leaving with satisfaction. Arriving at Frank's ward, he was looking out the window, the dim streetlights shadowing his expression. As he noticed someone enter, Frank turned to me with a smile. Ensuring the patient remains in good spirits the night before the surgery is crucial. Asking him, how are you feeling now? Any discomfort? Frank shook his head, a smile lingering on his lips. Rest well, don't worry too much, I assured him before turning to leave. As I did, Frank suddenly grabbed my hand, looking into my eyes. Stella, can you stop liking? Facing his gaze, memories of promises he made flashed in my mind from when we were together. However, today, with a slow but firm tone, I rejected him. From now on, who I like has nothing to do with you. I didn't care if he genuinely liked me before, or if he now liked Wendy, or regretted and wanted to like me again. I didn't want to dwell on who was more at fault in this relationship. It was time to end it. Finally, Frank let go of my hand, lying back exhaustedly. I told him to rest well, then left. When I turned around and closed the door, I was caught off guard by Vincent waiting outside. How did you come here? I asked. He glanced at the hospital room behind me and replied, I haven't seen you for so long, so I came to find you. I nodded without suspicion and suggested we go eat. Vincent's eyes lit up, almost wagging an imaginary tail. I checked the time, took out my phone, and called Christina. Are you finished? Let's go eat. Putting my phone back into my pocket, I pretended not to notice the slightly dejected look on the man beside me, but deep down, I couldn't help but smile. The dinner passed amidst Vincent's resentment, Christina's righteousness, and my nonchalance. The surgery the next day went very well. When I came out, I saw Wendy with red eyes, and I lowered my gaze without saying a word. I didn't have the obligation to comfort them continuously. Healing the sick was my duty, but I didn't have a saintly heart. Some kind words, I only said once. Vincent started coming more often. Today he had a cold and came to buy medicine. Tomorrow he conveniently passed by to bring food. And the day after he arranged to have dinner with Christina, and also included me, always with various reasons. At first, I could convince myself that maybe he did have things to do, but eventually, I couldn't bear it anymore. After a particular time, when he adept knocked on the door and entered, I frowned and called out to him, Vincent, our lawyer's so free. He sat on the couch and replied, it's fine, can't I take a break and rest if I'm tired? I opened my mouth. You said you heard what I said that day. My voice was soft but clear. Vincent paused while drinking water. I know. I felt a headache coming on, but I also said I don't need you as a friend. Vincent's dark eyes looked over, lips slightly glistening from the water. I turned my head away, not wanting to look at him, because in his eyes, I saw sincerity. Vincent continued to find reasons to come to my office as usual, sometimes even bringing his laptop to work there. He often brought things for me, like candy, hot chocolate, a doll, or a cactus. He said cacti were easy to care for, so I wouldn't have to worry too much. Gradually, I started keeping a few candies in my coat pocket, sucking on them when I felt uncomfortable. I would also crack open the window a little on rainy days to give the cactus some air, or embrace the doll for a nap during rare lunch breaks. After that day, whenever Vincent came, I just went along with it. Today, I didn't see Vincent in my office all day, thinking he might be busy, but I ran into him in the emergency department again. It was a car accident. When I arrived, doctors were performing emergency treatment on him. Seeing him lying on the hospital bed, my eyes welled up. His carefully groomed hair now softly fell on his forehead, with blood stains on his temple, profile, and chin. Even his black suit looked darker due to the blood seeping in. His hand hung by the bed, swaying slightly with the doctor's movements, and his lips almost pale due to excessive blood loss. Despite feeling stiff, I forced myself to check Vincent's test results. Knowing what needed to be done, due to his head injury from the accident and dropping blood pressure, surgery was urgently required. After a brief and urgent discussion, I signed the papers as instructed by the department head. Before entering the operating room, I finished chewing a piece of candy, thoroughly disinfected, and took a deep breath at the door. The lead surgeon was my teacher, and I voluntarily requested to assist him. It seemed Vincent had made a protective move during the accident, and the surgery didn't last long. It felt swift. Vincent was moved to the intensive care unit. Sitting by his bedside, I wondered why I always seemed to meet this man in the hospital. Propping up my chin with my right hand, I looked at him closely, from his forehead to eyes, nose, and thin lips. Those days, I often thought back to the past. Vincent wasn't lively back then, but he would occasionally joke with me and Christina, sharing dry and lame jokes. Christina and I would often laugh at him, with Christina mostly bursting into laughter, while I stifled my own. Vincent would occasionally show a rare expression of embarrassment, usually by pursing his lips, turning his head forward, then looking back to make sure we were following him. I remembered seeing him covered in blood in the emergency room, but I couldn't recall my thoughts at that moment. I just felt scared. Amidst the chaos, my inner state was more fearful than anything else. I let out a quiet sigh and suddenly noticed his eyes slowly opening. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my heart. Vincent recovered quickly, and he proved it by starting to work from his hospital bed on the 4th day of waking up. I still went to see him every day. "I heard it was your signature on the surgery sheet," he asked. I nodded, about to explain. "Is it as a girlfriend?" His foxy eyes arched slightly. For the following week, I forced Vincent to stay at home. He seemed busy during those days, with me often seeing him on video calls with his laptop, glimpses of the DK building, suspecting it was related to a previous case. A month later, Vincent had recovered quite well. "Let's go. I know a place that serves delicious fish soup," he said. Since Vincent was still recuperating, I ended up driving us to the restaurant. I parked the car across the street, intending to walk with him. As we waited at the traffic light, someone accidentally bumped into me, causing me to stumble forward. Thankfully, Vincent caught me just in time. The passerby apologized to me, and I just smiled in response. I turned to Vincent and thanked him. He then casually moved his hand from my arm to hold my hand. I tried to pull away, but couldn't break free. Looking ahead, Vincent said, "There are too many people. It's better if I hold your hand." Feeling his grip tighten, as I subtly curved my fingers, I realized he was holding on even tighter. I fell silent and stopped resisting. Later that evening, just when I was about to finish work, I received a call from Vincent. "Stella, can you come pick me up?" His voice was deep and hoarse, making me frown. "Have you been drinking?" There was a soft yes from the other end of the phone. Suppressing the urge to question him about why he started drinking right after recovering, I hung up the phone and went to collect Vincent. He was leaning on the sofa, and I could feel his colleagues' meaningful glances as I led him away. I had initially planned to take him to his place, but he was too out of it to provide his address. In the end, I had to bring him back to my own home. After getting him settled in bed, I tried to remove his coat, but he squirmed and resisted. Irritated, I pinched his cheek, causing him to finally release his grip. I took off his coat and went to the bathroom to get a damp towel to wipe his forehead. As I was wiping his forehead, he suddenly opened his eyes and softly called out, "Stella." His eyes were clear, and I even doubted if he was truly drunk. Suddenly, his eyes welled up with tears. I was startled. Was he about to cry? "Stella, Stella, Stella." He kept calling my name, and I kept responding. He finally stopped after what felt like forever, but his gaze lingered on me. His once clear eyes now filled with a mist of tears, and I felt like I could get lost in them. "Stella, can you like me?" He grasped my hand tightly, as if holding onto something precious. "I really like you." His voice sounded humble, tinged with a hint of drunken vulnerability. I looked into Vincent's eyes. We were close, so close I could smell the alcohol on him, mixed with a faint hint of mint, reminding me of the mint candies he often gave me. Cool and refreshing, just like now. I sighed lightly and leaned in. I planted a kiss on Vincent's lips, then on the tip of his nose, and finally, on his eyes. I could feel his eyelashes fluttering, hear the quickening heartbeat, unsure if it was mine, his, or ours. I knew it. I was wavering in that unknown moment. "I'm not sentimental, except with you. My name is Vincent. I have a childhood friend named Christina. One day when we were kids, she excitedly brought a little girl to introduce to me as her good friend. I politely greeted her, not paying much attention. The girl's voice was soft and tender. I'm Stella." From then on, the two of them were inseparable, turning my longtime duo with Christina into a trio. Christina was lively, always chattering and playing around. Stella, do you think this dress looks good on me? Or Stella, can I borrow your homework to check? Or even Stella, let us help you clean up today. Stella, always patient, always gentle, always smiling back at Christina's antics. I couldn't understand. Was Stella this patient with everyone? My interactions with Stella were limited. We would exchange greetings in the hallway and nod at each other when handing out assignments. Nothing more. It puzzled me even more. Stella seemed unenthusiastic towards me, unlike her warmth towards Christina. But I paid it no mind. Over time, I noticed Stella didn't like eating bamboo shoots, and whenever Christina disrupted while cleaning up, she would quietly watch them play, swiftly finishing her own tasks. Walking home from school together, I trailed behind the two girls, admiring Stella's long ponytail swaying back and forth. Subconsciously, I positioned myself by her side on the roadside. Though we rarely spoke afterwards, I would often catch glimpses of her in the crowd. She would always have that gentle smile, her eyes occasionally forming into a crescent moon shape. She reminded me of the moon. Later on, Stella and Christina started whispering among themselves, occasionally casting glances my way that I couldn't quite understand. But every time, it made me nervous. For a while, Christina kept missing our trio activities, with all sorts of lousy excuses. Whenever Christina wasn't around, the atmosphere between Stella and me would become quiet, and I could feel her gaze sticking to me with joy. Thinking back on Christina's recent odd behaviors, I started to vaguely suspect that Stella might like me. It made me happy, and I thought about finding an opportunity to talk to Stella. But before I could do so, my dad found out where my mom and I were living now, and he refused to leave, begging my mom for forgiveness on his knees. Worried, I started leaving school early during that period. The aftermath of this matter was that the man ended up back in the house again. When I returned to school, I saw the girl with the curved eyebrows once more, but this time, she didn't keep her gaze glued to me. I began to wonder if it was because I was too late and missed the right moment to be honest with her, leaving her waiting for too long, losing patience. I wanted to approach her, but suddenly, I was afraid of becoming just like that man. So, I didn't dare to get close. We went back to how we were at the beginning. Later, both of them went to medical school, while I went to the law school. After getting into university, my mom and I moved away from where we used to live. By then, she had developed depression, and I found myself shuttling between my studies and taking care of my mom's illness. Sometimes at night, when I opened the window and looked up at the moon, I would think of that girl. I still kept in touch with Christina, and she finally found out about that incident. I begged her to keep it a secret, and she promised me she would. She knew who I was really trying to hide it from. During the few chats I had with Christina, I would subtly ask about Stella's well-being. I heard that everything was going well for her. I was happy for her. After graduating, I joined a somewhat prestigious law firm, took on some cases, successfully closed them, and made a name for myself. I saw Stella again, this time at the hospital. That's when I found out that she worked there as a professor of neurosurgery. I clung to her as if she were my life preserver, asking her to treat my mom. Deep down, I knew that this comfort was just a drop in the bucket, because my mom didn't want to live. I thought she probably didn't want me anymore. Towards the end, she hesitated to speak, only saying not to be too hard on that girl. I knew she was referring to Stella. I didn't know when she had met Stella, or what she thought of her. It wasn't until Stella came out of the operating room, lowered her head, and apologized to me. I trembled as I hugged her, even though I knew my mom didn't have the will to live, and I had prepared myself mentally. Hearing it still made me cry. Since then, I haven't seen Stella. I went abroad and came back. When I returned, I heard from Christina that Stella was in love. I didn't have any particular feelings about it. It felt like the right thing to happen since she was so great. One time, Stella updated a photo on her social account, a candid shot of the moon, with the caption, "I feel like I can catch the moon." I was happy for her but didn't dare to like the picture. Our next meeting was at a bar. I frowned as I watched her drink heavily, and Christina came over to inform me that Stella had broken up with someone 4 years younger than her. I didn't say anything and silently took Stella back home. Drunk Stella was different from her usual self, petulant and rolling around, so I had no choice but to pacify her. By the time she fell asleep, it was already midnight. I sat by the window, silently watching over her, tucked her in, and then left. Afterward, I thought now that she was single, maybe I could give it a try. I didn't insist on being with her. I just wanted to get a little closer. Christina told me she had told Stella about that incident. I was nervous, waiting for Stella's reaction. So, I found reasons to see her every day after that. Thankfully, she wasn't scared of me. I followed her intentionally when she went to see Frank. I knew he held her back, because he saw me at the door and asked if Stella could stop liking me. I was waiting for an answer. At least she didn't say she didn't like me. The small flame inside me flickered again. The car accident wasn't an accident. Those days when I felt someone following me on my way to the hospital, I feared they would follow me to Stella. So, I stopped seeing her. I later found out it was Kai's people trying to use me to obtain the DK building's secrets. I refused, leading to the staged car accident. I didn't anticipate startling Stella like that. I felt guilty. That night, I wasn't as drunk as I pretended to be, perhaps fueled by alcohol-induced courage. I asked Stella if she could like me. That night, I called her Stella 11 times. As if compensating for all those years of not daring to say that endearment out loud. While awaiting judgment, my heart was in my throat, maybe too nervous, unable to hold back my tears. Thankfully, she kissed me. At that moment, I wanted to tell her, Stella, you don't need to catch the moon, you are the moon yourself.